Let's get into it. So I want to talk about health, and I think the key thing to remember is that getting sick from asbestos is preventable. We can stop you getting sick, and far too many people are dying from asbestosis, mesothelioma. 170 people every year. That's a hell of a lot of people. And we do like to bang on about people falling off ladders and things, and I know that happens and it's horrendous. However, a hell of a lot of people are out there dying from a disease that you could easily prevent. So I just think it's really important to keep that in mind. As many of you know, I am a nurse. Most of you never had the pleasure of me giving you a bed bath, so that's probably a good thing. And I've seen a lot of people die, a lot of people. I nursed mainly in my 20s and early 30s, and a lot of people dying from lung cancer. And a number of you have probably seen people die from some type of lung cancer, respiratory disease. And I would say categorically it's probably one of the worst ways to die. So if some of you carry on with the way you work at the moment, you will be in hospital in 10, 20 years' time dying from respiratory disease. But you can stop that happening, and I think that's really, really important. So that's me on my soapbox. I've usually got a soapbox bit, and that's my bit for today. Where do you think that's taken? Any ideas? New York, yep. Could be Canterbury though, couldn't it? God forbid. But with rescue workers in New York, Craig gave me this photo, thanks mate. I just found it quite a sort of one that makes you sit up and think really. These guys are absolutely covered in asbestos. They were the rescue workers that went into when the Trade Centre was bombed. Was it bombed? Yeah, I suppose they bombed it. And look, that could happen in Canterbury. You know, when we first had the earthquakes and there was dust everywhere and it was all around the city. So don't think that it doesn't happen to New Zealanders. We're not as bulletproof as we like to think we are, and it can certainly happen here. So hopefully we're not going to see a lot of people getting sick in 10 or 20 years. I've got a video to show you. One of my videos. I'm good at showing videos, and yeah.
Went to college, did the usual things in his apprenticeship, and I was an apprentice pipe fitter welder. We had lots of regular jobs we had to do, which continually exposed you to asbestos. Everything on a boiler in those days was asbestos. Every gasket was asbestos. Everything was asbestos, you know. You strip the boilers down twice a year and you'd have to scrape all the joints off, and they were all asbestos. Other people were in the area when you're doing it as well, so it's just not you getting contaminated. Everybody else around you is getting contaminated. And the company never supplied us with any protective equipment because it was, in those days, health and safety didn't mean anything. I don't think I ever wore a dust mask until I was about 30. I guessed it was mesothelioma. I've always known that it could happen because of the asbestos I've worked with. My oncologist, about 4 or 5 weeks ago, he said, we're not going to do the chemo today. I went, righto. So he said to me, he said, I'd like to tell you, I don't think you're going to make Christmas. All I was trained to do was the job. I was never trained to do with anything with health and safety whatsoever. I'm not even sure the guys teaching me were aware of any risks. When I was an apprentice, I worked in this canteen. The pipe fitters were doing an awful lot of work in there. And I remember that the tea ladies used to make all the rolls in there. And there am I, banging away with hammer and chisel, knocking all this asbestos off. And all this dust, and all these women. When you realise what you may have done to other people, it's so sad. You may be 17, you may be 18, but you're not immortal. And what you do today may have terrible consequences 30 years down the road. And if you want to die of a disease that's not the most pleasant disease in the world to die of, then you carry on as you are. But if you want to live longer than that and not die of this disease, then you take in all the information about it that you're given and take it in seriously. because the only way you can get this disease is through asbestos.
So some pretty powerful messages there. Chris has since died, and there's many, many stories like that if you go simply to YouTube, to be honest. So we don't want lots of stories like that in 10 or 20 years of our Canterbury workers sitting there saying those things. So we've got to stop people getting sick. It's really important. So back to the PowerPoint. There's some lungs. The normal lungs on the left. Mesothelioma. You see the tumours have taken hold there. And the heavy exposure to asbestos on the right. So it's starting to kill those lungs. Not very technical terms, but that's basically what's happening to your lungs if you're getting exposed to asbestos on a regular basis. So we don't want that happening. So yeah, obviously these have all been done post-mortem. So smoking, a lot of employers say to me, I don't see why I have to worry about health monitoring because my workers smoke. And I don't see why I need to give them any information about asbestos or the respiratory hazards they're exposed to because my workers smoke. Yep, no, smoking's not a good idea, and smoking is synergistic with asbestos. The two together will make things much, much worse. But it doesn't matter whether workers smoke or not. PCBUs, employers, duty holders, still have a duty to look after their workers, and you as workers also have a duty to look after yourself. So, yeah, I'm not going to bang on about smoking. It's just not a good idea. We know that. Okay, there is plenty of legislation out there. Craig and Nick have talked about that today. But there is some in particular that relates to health. So it is important that you are aware of that. Remember that the Health and Safety at Work Act, Section 36, that's your overarching piece of legislation about monitoring the health of your workers. I'm still constantly surprised by the number of PCBUs who try to get out of health monitoring. It gets very tedious, to be honest. I know our inspectors often come to me and say, and it would happen every week, I can't get this PCBU to do health monitoring. They don't see why they need to do lung function tests. They don't see why they need to do hearing tests. And it just seems to be something people are just trying to get out of. Some people are doing it really well. It's not that expensive. It's about $80 for 1 or 2 workers to get it done. And, spread the cost over the year. It's a really good way to pick up early that people could potentially be getting sick. So we've got that Act, which is for all health, and then specifically, I hate that word, specifically for asbestos, we've got the regs, so 15 and 16 talk about providing health monitoring, and then also we've got the general workplace regs. So there's plenty of things there for the inspectors to point at, and it is about being proactive and doing some health monitoring in this space when people are exposed to respiratory hazards, and in particular to asbestos. And asbestos is more heavily regulated than anything else. So the details are in the approved code of practice for the management and removal of asbestos, Part C, 16. So just do have a look at that and make yourself familiar with it. I'll give you an overview of it now, though, so you know what you need to do. Okay, so who does it apply to? So think about who does it apply to, who does it not apply to. That seems to be the fallback position for a lot of employers. They try and work out who doesn't need it and come up with far more people. So all Class A licensed asbestos removal work people, they need it. It's pretty straightforward there. Class B, when it involves more than 4 weeks in a 12-month period. Licensed asbestos assessors and workers carrying out other asbestos-related work or unlicensed work. My suggestion is, if in doubt, do the health monitoring. At least get baseline. So the baseline gives you something to start with and shows where things are at, and future results can be compared to that. So really important to do that at least. The full asbestos, there's debate about what this needs to actually include, whether or not it needs to include a chest x-ray. One side of the fence says yes, the other says no. A lot of people say at least get a baseline chest x-ray again, so you've got something to compare to. So it includes all those things: physical exam, lung function test, good history, that's really, really important. And then any records of any exposure that may have occurred for that worker, any air monitoring results that may have been done, any investigations like Craig was talking about, if there'd been any contamination where someone's been potentially exposed. It's really useful to have that information for the person doing their exam, who will most often be a doctor or maybe a nurse who specialises in this. So how often do you need to do it? There you go. 1 year, 5 years. This is in addition to your ordinary health monitoring program. So if your workers are regularly exposed to dust, any type of dust on their site, they need to have an annual lung function and respiratory questionnaire in addition to this. This doesn't take the place of that. So it's pretty regular, every few years. Respiratory protective equipment. This tends to be the biggest bugbear out there. I haven't got I could put my glasses on, but there's a few hairy faces. And the trouble is, as I've said before, it's pretty trendy out there to have a beard on construction sites. If you have a beard, any facial hair, a P2 mask won't work, and P3, most of you will need the air-fed respirators. So please bear that in mind. Just slapping on a mask, even like this, it's not going to work.
But even at P3, full face mask, you've got a full beard.
Yep.
That
You've got to wear a full... Yeah, you've got to be... That's right, mate. Exactly. Sorry, I thought you were asking me. But no, you're right. You're dead right. And I see that. And we see the people like with this mask here, and they think they've got their beard all shoved up in it, don't they? And it doesn't work. It just doesn't. So you're exposing yourself to asbestos. You might as well not be wearing anything. Okay? The other issues... I'll put my glasses on so I can read. You've got all the other gear on, your hard hats and your goggles, trying to get everything compatible. Sometimes you don't need a hard hat on. Don't wear the damn thing. Your respiratory protection is what is really important. Glasses can interfere. High temperatures and everything gets hot and steamy if it's humid. And some people find masks really hard to wear, to be honest. You've got to be trained. You don't just go around slapping masks on people and say, here you go forth and conquer. You've got to train people on how to use it. You've got to tell people why they need to wear it. Give them some really good, robust information about that. And it needs to be fit tested. It's got to be fit tested. And our inspectors will issue notices for that. They will issue an improvement notice for that. If you're struggling to get workers without facial hair, you're going to have some pretty robust discussions about how that's going to work. And our inspectors will expect to see those air-fed respirators being used on site. So please do that. Also keep them in a sealed container. I was in a site the other day, it was actually an electroplating bath at a manufacturing site, and they had the respirator hanging up right beside the bath. Often I go onto a construction site and ask the guys where their masks are, and they'll go in the back of their van and start rummaging around amongst all their paints and solvents, all their dusty gear. Here's my mask, okay? The other thing I love is when you all share your masks. That's great. We've all got completely different shaped faces. As you get older, your face shape changes. If you lose a bit of weight, your face shape changes as well. So we don't share masks. And I could probably find a few sites now. It's a bit wet. I probably won't go out there today, but I could find a few where I could find people sharing masks. I would say probably only 50% are fit tested. I think that's generous. And I would find some really dodgy practices going on out there. Someone's probably out there with lots and lots of dust at the moment with just the face mask you buy from Bunnings. Okay? With asbestos, it has to be a P3. Get some advice. This is what you're relying on to protect you, basically. And for most of you, you're not doing it properly. So in 10 or 20 years, you've been thinking, oh yeah, I'm wearing my mask and I'm looking after myself. In 10 or 20 years, you're going to get asbestosis, you're going to get mesothelioma, and it comes down quite simply to the fact that, one, you might not have wanted to shave that beard, but you still worked with asbestos and you're exposed to dust on a regular basis. Or you wore some crappy mask that you shared with your two mates on site. I know that sounds harsh, but that's the reality, people. You can stop it. Wear a decent mask and you'll look after yourself a hell of a lot better. And what else? P3. So P3, line fed, the air-fed ones I talked about, self-contained breathing apparatus. They're not fun to wear, but I'd rather wear that than get lung cancer, thanks very much. Legislation, plenty of it there. Remember, all this is on will be on the website in about a week or two on with the videos. So there's New Zealand standards that you need to comply with, so we can point you at those if you're not sure. There they are again. All meet the requirements of the Act. So that's the health side of it. So yeah, look after yourself. That's the main thing there. Just with the Code of Practice, the one that came out in November, some of you will have it. There have been a couple of amendments to that, and there's some information on this here. So we have actually released another more updated version, and that's available on our website. Just fairly minor changes though, and the detail is there. But you can have a look at that when you have a look on site. Okay, that's me.